Hey, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and it's a privilege to chat with you this morning. And I want to take one moment, because John Erpelding's sitting here, and to say thank you for John, for this whole sermon is based on him. Yeah, because the whole thing is about change and transition going forward on purpose. And John, as a chairperson of our staff pastor parish relations committee, is heavily involved in working with David and Julie, and working with John and Mary Lynn, and working with the pastor parish committee, and other things that come up along the way that sometimes aren't expected. And I think your leadership is very important, and thank you for doing that. Well, change and transition. When I look at the message of Jesus Christ throughout the gospel, I become aware that change and transformation and transition are forever present themes. New life, born again, resurrection, new creation, new order of behavior, healing, action, mission, going from glory to glory. Right, Teresa? It's all moving, it's all changing, it's all in transition. Shiloh United Methodist Church is 200 years old this year. That's amazing, right? 200 years old. How many of you are 200 years old? How many of you feel like you're 200 years old? Has anything changed in 200 years? Well, the answer is obviously yes. And it will continue to change in form and mission, because that's what happens. It's what happens. Stuff changes. And so our focus today certainly is about how Shiloh changes and will change, and the transition that will take place while it changes. But the message this morning is also about each one of us and how we change and how we handle transitions along the way, and how we do that on purpose. How do we transition on purpose? Change happens. Boom. Bill Bridges, a guy that's written a book that's pretty popular called Managing Transitions, used heavily in the marketplace and the business community. And he talks about the difference between change. He talks about change being what happens, and transition is that whole piece about how we respond to that change. Transition kind of has two pieces: how we choose to respond to that change or not, and the second part of transition, it happens over time. Change can be immediate. Boom, job loss. Boom, somebody very close to you dies suddenly. Done. Change. It's immediate. Now. The transition of how we respond to that happens over a period of time. And it can happen positively. It can happen less positively. It's our choice. Change is constant. Change is unavoidable. It just happens. There's not really much we can do about that. But in the middle of it, we go back to pieces that hold us together in the midst of our faith, such as God is the Alpha and the Omega. God is the beginning and the end. Before us was God, after us is God, with us is God. And as we move to understand the different aspects of our life and how that all transitions, that will make some sense to us. It's in our faith that we gather that sense. So with that, Ryan, we're going to take a look at some slides. I know this is going to feel like a high school or college class for a couple of minutes, but hang with me. These slides and the intent of them we've shared in the administrative leadership team, and I think Dave then has shared, in fact, with the staff in terms of how to, just thinking about the changes that are upon us and how we transition. This first slide is a concept, Chinese word called Weiji. Now, if I mispronounce it, if I don't have it exactly right, just kind of go with me on it because it makes a good point. And the point is, it's the word Weiji has two. It's a word for change, and change has two aspects to it: opportunity and danger. Opportunity and danger. Change can be opportunity, danger. So how we enter into the transition of a resulting change has two directions that it could go. Next one, Ryan. So the transition process, and this is simply a process put together by a couple different people. Anybody familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the work she did with On Death and Dying back in 1969? If you've heard anybody talk to you about the grief cycle, the stages of grief, that all kind of originated from her. And that work was done with her going and interviewing people who were dying. And so she would go visit with them, and so her transcripts were all about the verbatims of the interactions and the conversations that she had with them. And after doing a number of those, she collected that and came up with commonalities in what these people were experiencing. But it was the dying that she was talking to. And the 5 stages of grief that she dealt with, came up with, were, first of all, was shock. Sometimes when you Google it, they talk about 5 stages, and other people talk about 6. I'm going with 6. The one that's left out when there's only 5 is shock. The first stage is shock. Sorry, Mrs. Tim. Your tests are back. Diagnosis is in, and you have cancer, and it's not just in your upper body, it's metastasized itself at other parts of your body. And you don't have long. Shock. Total shock for that individual at that point. And some of you, I'm sure, have experienced that. Shock. You just, nothing else is going on. There's no other thought. It's just shock. Then the next stage she goes on to is denial, anger, bargaining. If I do this, if I do that, God help me. I'll call my firstborn John, anything, that whole bargaining piece. Depression and acceptance. Shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The stages of grief. As time has gone on, those same stages of grief, we've moved them over and applied them to other aspects of our life and transition in the midst of change. For you see, whenever something changes, something dies, so to speak. Something is lost. Something ends. Or at the very least, something's quite different than it was before. And so in that whole ending piece, that it's there where the transition begins. Hello, Ms. Smith? HR, you walk into your boss's office and you have HR sitting there. Anybody have that experience? You know what I'm talking about, right? And you're not expecting HR to be there. And they sit down and say, well, Tim, have a seat. And I say, sure. And sit down and say, well, here's the deal. Many things. We're losing money. We're going in a different direction. You just don't have the skills that we need at this time. So, am I changing offices? Am I moving to the building next door? Am I going to a different department? No. Effective now, your job is eliminated. So, did you just say that I don't work here anymore? Yes. Shock, denial, anger, all those things begin to come into play. And yes, also, when things happen like that around a sudden death of a loved one. Boom. So those are some examples of what's going on. So the change happens. So next slide, Ryan. It's the reason I have the clock here is to keep track of me. So this is a little bit more detail. The event over there, so we have the ending, and then we have a new beginning. I haven't talked about the new beginning yet. So, but the new beginning is what we want to get to, right? New beginning. New life, born again, resurrection, new creation, new order of behavior. Glory to glory. Forever changed. Never be the same. That's the new beginning, but then there's the ending. See the 5? We got those stages of grief that we somehow wind our way through. Let me take a minute and say, every change is different. Every transition is different. All of you might have the same situation, but you would go through it differently. You might go through some of these stages. You might go through a few. You might go through all of them. You might circle back through them. I'm not trying to give you a formula that's perfect, that meets up exactly with where you are or what you are or who you are or your situation, but it's a model for us at least to look upon. So something ends, and then at some point we need a new purpose, a new vision, a new picture, a new plan that we can reach to that takes us from the, I guess I should go this way, from the ending to the new beginning. It's that new vision, that new thought thing that pushes us through. It's got to be an idea out there first. It's got to be a hope, an aspiration before we can get there. And nobody can do it for us. On the ending, we can start there. Often people start there and they go through and spend, with a job loss, it might be a week or 2 or 3. And they begin to get comfortable to talk to people again, and we get them to do the work. And then there's some level of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you love it. It just means, okay, it happened. And they begin to move out, begin to look for job leads, begin to do some networking, begin to talk to some other people, and they get in the neutral zone and get kind of excited, and all of a sudden they'll say, yeah, this is uncomfortable, and then they'll flip back to that ending. They'll flip back to the past. The past is known, it's concrete, it's happened, we know the rules, we know where we've been, and there's a comfort level there. What's the problem? It's the past and you can't go back. You can love it. You can respect it. You can cherish it. You can learn from it. But we can't go back. From an emotional standpoint, we do flip back into that ending space. But eventually, there's going to be a new something at some point. When, in fact, will that be? We don't really know for sure. But we do know that the hard part is getting back through there and getting to that new deal. So how do we create that new vision? Next slide. So this is an old writing. Many of you have seen this. Any of you ever been around or familiar with old George Schwindel? All right, he was a minister at some point. Good chance he's dead. Happens. But his message for us in getting through transitions is powerful. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It's more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people think or say or do. It's more important than appearances, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, or a home. The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change the past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I am convinced that life is 10% of what happens to me and 90% of how I react to it. And so it is with you. And our attitude in the midst of the Christian faith is born out of the confidence that God is with us and can hold us and can handle whatever it is that happens to us, hold our hand and be with us in that. We are not alone, and that gives us good energy and good hope into the future. So some changes, I'm asking forgiveness on a little bit of redundancy, but at any rate, it's age. Some changes are quick and clear and immediate. Others are slow, unclear, and over long periods of time. Some changes appear to be more positive, others clearly much harder and negative, others are just complex. So when a job loss happens, boom. When a loved one who we care about dies quickly, as brutally cruel as it is, it's clear, and we know what happened. Changes that are the transitions are a little bit more difficult are the ones that happen over time. So I don't know where this little adage came from. I've heard it a number of times. I don't know if there's any science around it. I don't know who to attribute it to. But it's a story about the old frog. You know this? So if you take a pan of water and you boil the water, get it boiling water. Got it? You take a frog and put the frog in the boiling water, the frog jumps out. Now, if you take a pan of water that's kind of, we'll call it coldish, and you put the frog in the water, and you turn the temperature up slowly over time, the frog dies. A transition is occurring so slow that the frog doesn't realize what's going on, and pretty soon their system shut down and they die. Shiloh is 200 years old. And it started out 200 years old, and there weren't Chevys and Fords and Dodge Rams and Chevy 150s parked in the parking lot. And over time, there's been a number of ministers, but in some ways, it kind of has changed very slowly. My point isn't that the church is dead. My point is that when transitions go slow over time, it's risky, and there needs to be intention in making those changes. And with Dave and Julie leaving and John and Mary Lynn coming, as well as other transitions that we have in our midst, we have before us a transition that we all have the opportunity to participate in. The other thing about churches and transitions, everything I talked about was all those personal transitions, losing a loved one, losing a job, maybe a divorce, all those personal kind of transitions. Oh, did I leave out aging? Aging's one of those long things. It's kind of like the cool water and the frog. And then we woke up one day and we couldn't hear so well, couldn't see so well. Nothing's really changed, except we have 18 grandchildren and a bunch of other people. In the church, all of our transitions, mine are going on, yours are going on, Allie's are going on, yours are going on, and everybody's kind of moving and transitioning in their own little deal. And then we're all in a church that we'd all like the church to be. How would we all like the church to be? We'd all like the church to be the way we'd like the church to be. So how do we, in the midst of getting to that new vision and that new place, how do we pull that together? And that, in fact, is one of the calls to action that we have going forward. So we have a scripture story where a man, Jesus goes across the lake, there's a storm, he falls asleep, Jesus wakes up, the guys wake him up, he calms the storm, he tells him not to be afraid. I've been on boats, I get afraid, and I get it. So the guy comes to Jesus. He's been chained up. He's been thrown out of the community. He's been filled with demons of all sorts. And Jesus heals him. And in the healing, the healed man says, "What now? I want to remain with you, Jesus. I want to stay right here with you. I want to be with you. I want to go with you." Jesus says what? No, you can't. You have to move on into that new world. So what's it like to have lepers your whole life, to have demons your whole life, to have obsessions and addictions and other kinds of problems in your life, and then now one is healed? He has to gradually now figure out how to live in that new life. It takes time. It takes time for us individually to move through our transitions. First of all, we need to recognize this is kind of going on inside of us. And then when it comes to the church, how do we do that together in a give and take, spirited way, respecting and loving and cherishing each one as we go through the process? So the call to action, embracing our own transitions in the many places in our lives, accepting that others are in transition in their own way alongside us. How do we take a breath and allow time, be kind to ourselves, and allow time for that transition, to do it on purpose to get us to a new place? It's our faith that will guide us. It's God holding our hand. Here's what's not changed. God is with you and is even with you to the end of the age. God is the Alpha and the Omega. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, not things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, or anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. That is our constant. That is our rock, even while we are moving from one place to another in constant change.